My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm 58 years old, logistics manager at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Detroit. Or, I was until last Tuesday at 9:12 a.m., when my phone rang during my second cup of coffee and a quarterly inventory review. The caller ID read, HR. Main line. I picked up, expecting a reminder about the benefits plan we'd been waiting on for months. Instead, I got a script. Hi Mark, this is Diane from HR. I'm calling to inform you that, effective immediately, your position is being eliminated as part of departmental restructuring. We appreciate your 27 years of service. That was it. No warning. No conversation. No Doug me boss of 12 years. Just a disembodied voice and a memorized sentence. I asked if Doug was on the line. He wasn't. He wasn't available. Diane offered to email me the separation paperwork. I didn't respond. Just sat there staring at the spreadsheets I had open. Cells filled with inventory numbers and freight costs that suddenly didn't matter. 27 years. I'd started with this company in 1997, when shipping labels were handwritten and I loaded half the trucks myself. I trained every new operations manager for a decade straight. Missed anniversaries. My daughter's ballet recitals. Even my father's funeral for a deadline I now couldn't even remember. I didn't shout. Didn't argue. I said, understood, and hung up. Then I opened my benefits calendar. Tomorrow, Wednesday, was the official start of our upgraded healthcare plan. The one with full oncology coverage. The one that made my treatment viable. The one they knew I'd been waiting for. My stomach dropped. I checked the timestamp on the HR email that came in just after the call. Termination date. Tuesday, 5 p.m. Exactly one day before my treatment coverage began. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an oversight. This was strategy. Cold, clinical, cost-saving strategy. I stood in the break room, phone still in my hand, surrounded by the smell of burnt coffee and last Friday's donuts. And let it settle. They hadn't just fired me. They had timed it. They waited until the exact moment it would hurt the most and called it restructuring. 6 months earlier, I sat in a sterile exam room under flickering fluorescent lights while Dr. Weaver said words that changed my world. Stage 2 prostate cancer, Mark. It's early, and it's treatable, but we need to act. He handed me a pamphlet about treatment options, but I'd stopped reading by the second paragraph. I wasn't scared. Not right away. I was angry. Not at the cancer. At the timing. I just started training my new assistant. Had a logistics audit coming up, and a supplier renegotiation scheduled for Q2. I didn't have time to be sick, but cancer doesn't care about your calendar. We caught it early, but the standard treatment options, radiation, hormone therapy, and potential surgery came with high costs. I had basic coverage through the company plan, but the real hope was a new benefit package we'd been promised was rolling out in June. It offered full oncology coverage, experimental treatment trials, and no copays for critical therapies. I circled June 12th in red ink. That plan would change everything. HR had even assured me in writing that I'd be included. We're behind you, Mark, Doug had said back in January. Take whatever time you need. We'll make this work. So I did what I've always done. I kept showing up. I scheduled treatments after hours. Hid the nausea under a forced smile. Wore long sleeves to hide the bruises from IV lines. Linda, my wife, told me to rest, begged me to take leave, but I couldn't risk it. That new plan was the finish line. All I had to do was make it to June 12th. I made notes in my work journal. Don't forget pallet count on Thursday. Ask procurement about vendor switch. Survive until coverage kicks in. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to stay alive long enough to afford to fight. The week before I was fired, Doug had even stopped by my office. How you feeling? He asked casually, sipping his coffee like it was any other day. I told him the truth, tired, but hopeful. That new plan was right around the corner. He smiled. patted my shoulder, and walked away. 3 days later, I was fired. One day, before the treatment that might have saved my life was finally within reach. You don't stay at a company for 27 years because it's perfect. You stay because it becomes part of your identity. A rhythm. A place where your name is on the break room fridge and the guard at the front desk doesn't need to ask for ID. I started at Twin Pines Logistics when we still hand-loaded crates into diesel trucks and tracked shipments on whiteboards. The office had rotary phones and a vending machine that ate your quarters. My first Christmas there, I missed my daughter's kindergarten recital because the distribution software crashed, and I was the only one who knew how to reboot it manually. Linda sent me a video of her singing Frosty the Snowman to an empty stage after the parents clapped. I watched it on mute, hunched over a greasy desk with a ham sandwich and a lukewarm Coke, and promised I'd make it up to her. I didn't. There was always something in inventory fire drill, a last-minute freight issue, a broken pallet jack. I was dependable, the guy who said yes when others said, "That's not my job." I once slept on the warehouse floor for 72 straight hours, when a freak snowstorm knocked out 3 loading bays during peak season. Ate cold pizza off a forklift and used printer boxes for pillows. We made our deadline. I didn't even get a bonus. Just a nod from Doug and an extra polo shirt with the company logo. I kept going anyway. Turned down job offers from 2 bigger firms, sewn with a corner office, the other with a 20% salary bump. "You've built something here," Doug said when I told him. "You're part of the foundation." I believed him. Stupid maybe, but I did. Every time the company changed names or switched CEOs, I stayed. I trained the new blood, covered the gaps, held the place together when morale dipped or systems failed. I thought that counted for something. That maybe, after almost 3 decades of loyalty, I'd earned a little back. But loyalty's not a two-way street in corporate America. It's a one-way ticket to being taken for granted. I didn't know it then, but all those late nights and missed birthdays weren't building a legacy. They were paving the smooth, quiet road they'd eventually push me downright to the exit. I didn't hear from Doug the day I got fired. Not even a text. This man, who I'd spent 12 years making look competent, couldn't be bothered to lift the phone. Just an automated email with my severance details, generic language about organizational change and realigning core functions. No mention of the cancer, no acknowledgement of 27 years. Just an attachment and a signature block. I stared at it for a long time, rereading the words like maybe I'd missed something human between the lines. I hadn't. The next morning, I called HR just to confirm the timeline. Diane, the same rep from the call, picked up. I asked her directly, "So my termination date was yesterday at 5 p.m.? She paused, long enough that I knew the answer before she said it. "Yes, that's correct. As of close of business, June 11th. I hung up. Then I opened my benefits portal. The new insurance plan, the one I'd spent 6 months surviving to reach, took effect at 12:01 a.m. on June 12th, midnight. Less than 7 hours after they severed me. My breath caught. Not in my chest, in my gut. It was too precise to be a coincidence. Someone had calculated that date. Had looked at the benefit timeline, lined it up against payroll cycles, and decided that a man with cancer was too expensive to keep for one more day. And Doug? He'd known. He'd walked past my desk just 2 days before, patted me on the shoulder, told me to hang in there. Almost through the worst of it, he'd said. He meant the treatment. I didn't realize he meant me. That's when it shifted from hurt to cold understanding. They didn't just let me go. They timed it. They exploited the gap between a system update and a human life. My illness became a line item. My treatment plan became a liability. And me? I became a statistic they hoped would go quietly. But I wasn't going to disappear. Not yet. They thought I'd be too tired, too sick, too defeated to fight. But I've been on warehouse floors in January without heat. I've worked 16-hour shifts on a broken knee. I know how to endure. What they didn't know was what 27 years teaches you about systems, and what happens when the quiet guy who kept everything running finally stops playing along. The next day I sat at my kitchen table with a copy of the employee handbook, a yellow legal pad, and a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour before I touched it. The handbook was thick, mostly legal jargon and HR platitudes, but I knew how to read between the lines. Logistics trains you to spot the fine print, the margin notes that screw up entire supply chains. I flipped to the benefits section and found the clause I'd hoped I'd misremembered. Page 47, subsection C, line 2. Coverage under the new premium benefits plan applies only to active employees as of the effective date. Active employees, not recently terminated. Not eligible for COBRA. Active, as in, not me. I flipped through the COBRA documents anyway, hoping for a loophole. There wasn't one. The continuation coverage was based on the old Planth barebones policy that barely covered annual checkups, let alone a 90-0 oncology treatment. I called our provider just to be sure. The rep's voice was kind, but her words were clinical. "We can continue your previous plan under COBRA, Mr. Reynolds, but you are not eligible for the upgraded coverage, as you were not employed on the plan's activation date." I asked her what the upgraded plan would have covered. She listed off the treatments: radiation, immunotherapy, advanced diagnostics, all fully covered with no deductible. I didn't speak for a moment. Just listened to her voice, echo in my ear, like a distant memory of something I almost had. When I hung up, I stared at the legal pad in front of me. I'd drawn a single box and labeled it Options. Underneath it, nothing. Not yet. But the more I sat there, the more that empty box felt like a spark. I wasn't angry in the way people expect. I didn't throw the mug or curse at the ceiling. It was colder than that. Quieter. Like a long, slow fuse finally catching light. I'd followed every rule, honored every policy, trusted every promise. And they'd used the system against me like a scalpel. What they didn't expect was that I'd start reading the fine print for them. I was going to find a way to make this right, not with rage, but with facts. With proof. With the truth they tried to bury one page at a time. I told Linda over dinner. Spaghetti. Like always on Fridays. She'd been humming in the kitchen when I sat down and told her flatly, "They fired me the day before my cancer treatment was supposed to start." Her hands froze on the dish towel. She didn't say anything right away. Just stared. "What do you mean?" she asked slowly, like she needed to hear it again, just to believe it. I explained the call, the email, the clause in the handbook, how the upgraded insurance plan went live less than 8 hours after my termination became official. By the time I finished, her eyes were wet, but her voice was sharp. They knew. They did this on purpose. I nodded. She didn't cry, not really. She clenched her fists, pressed them against her mouth, like they were holding back something bigger. "After everything you've given them." Her voice cracked then, and she got up, walked into the hallway, and didn't come back for a long time. When she did, she sat next to me on the couch, silent. I reached for her hand. "I'm not done," I said. "I know," she replied. I didn't sleep much that night. I opened my laptop, pulled up every email I'd ever received from HR, downloaded copies, saved them to a drive. I looked through my old performance reviews, letters of commendation, training certifications. I flagged every reference to my health accommodations and every conversation that even hinted at the new insurance plan. Then I made a spreadsheet. Timestamps, policy numbers, termination notice. I wasn't building a case. Not yet. I was building a record. Because this wasn't about shouting into the void. It wasn't about lawsuits or press or some social media crusade. This was about showing them what happens when you try to erase someone who's built their entire life around doing the right thing. They thought I'd walk away because I was sick, tired, and alone. But I wasn't alone. And I wasn't done. I'd spent 27 years making sure other people's messes didn't become disasters. Now I was going to clean this upon my terms. Quietly. Precisely. Permanently. I started digging the next morning. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just for answers. I wanted to know if I was the only one. If this was a clerical decision or a calculated move. I started with old emails department announcements. Retirements that didn't feel like retirements. Names that disappeared without much explanation. The deeper I looked, the clearer the pattern became. There was Claire from finance, 27 years, laid off 3 days before her back surgery was scheduled, right after her short-term disability request was approved. Then Ron, from procurement, had a stroke in 2018. Came back too soon. Fired under performance concerns 1 week before the new long-term care plan launched. I kept going. Beverly in IT, Hassan in compliance. All of them gone. All of them older. All of them with documented medical issues. Each let go just days or weeks before a benefit enhancement took effect. I pulled up press releases, HR emails, archived benefit brochures. Each announcement had a quiet footnote. Revised coverage begins, insert date. Each termination came right before it. It wasn't sloppy. It was methodical. Like someone had drawn a line across a calendar and said, "We keep the healthy. We cut the rest." That night, I messaged Paul Godfrey. He'd been in operations before. Trained me when I was still wearing steel-toe boots and printing spreadsheets on dot matrix paper. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I remembered his exit was sudden. Too sudden. He replied within an hour. "They let me go the week before I was supposed to start chemo," he wrote. Said the department was restructuring. Same HR contact. Same timing. I asked if he ever filed a complaint. Didn't have the energy, he said. Was focused on surviving. Thought maybe it was just bad luck. But if they're still doing it, Mark, you have to stop them. I promised I would. Closed the chat. Opened a new folder on my desktop. Labeled it, Names They Tried to Erase. I didn't know what the endgame was yet. But I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It never was. I hadn't thought about Jordan Park in years. We started in logistics together, fresh out of college, both in over our heads and pretending not to be. He left after 5 years, burned out and frustrated. Went to law school on a whim, he said. Last I heard, he was practicing employment law out of Chicago. I still had his number in an old contacts list. And when I dialed it, I half expected it to bounce. It didn't. Mark Reynolds, he said after a beat. Voice older, but still familiar. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. I told him everything. The firing. The insurance. The pattern. At first he just listened. Then he asked a single question. Do you have documentation? Plenty. I heard the shift in his tone. Okay. I'm in. Off the books. For now. We met on Zoom that night. He looked tired, same. Kind of tired I saw in the mirror, but sharper than I remembered. He'd gone up against companies before. Won a few ugly ones. Lost a couple too. Here's the thing, he said, pulling up a screen of legal statutes. This isn't just wrongful termination. If what you're saying holds up, this could be disability, discrimination, under the ADA. Maybe even health insurance fraud depending on how the benefit changes were handled. They'll say it's just restructuring, I said. They always do, he replied. But if they're targeting employees based on health status to avoid benefit costs, that's not just unethical, it's criminal. We outlined a plan. First step, build a timeline. Every termination, every benefit change, names, dates, policy numbers. Then gather testimony. Paul, Claire, anyone willing to talk. Jordan would stay off paper until we had enough to move. No formal filing. Not yet. You need to be smart about this, Mark, he said. They're counting on you being angry, reckless. That's how they win. But if you play this right. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I wasn't angry, not in the way they feared. I was focused, cold, steady. I'd spent my life solving other people's problems. Now I was solving my own. And this time, I had a lawyer who used to wear steel-toe boots just like me. Most people think your access gets cut the second you're fired. Usually, they're right. But our IT department had a habit of phasing out permissions in waves, especially for senior staff. Probably a bureaucratic oversight. Maybe a sign they didn't think I was a threat. Either way, it worked in my favor. I logged into the remote server through an old admin portal I used for warehouse coordination. It was still live, limited access, but just enough. I started digging quietly, methodically, looking for anything tied to HR, benefits, or Q2 planning. After 3 hours and 2 cups of reheated coffee, I found it, buried in a folder labeled Benefits 2024, QTR2, Internal. A Word doc. 5 pages. Internal notes from a leadership strategy session, dated March 19. The subject line, Cost Mitigation Opportunities. Benefits Transition. Page 2 had a bullet point that stopped me cold. Review high-risk benefit accounts before Client 2 changeover. Flag high-cost claimants for early exit strategy where appropriate. Underneath, a subnote in italics. Cross. Reference with current employee roster. Reynolds, Givens, Martinez, F. Patel. My name. In black and white. Not as a contributor. As a target. They didn't even try to hide the language. High-risk benefit accounts. Like we were data points. Not people. Not fathers, mothers, veterans, patients. I screenshotted the entire document. Downloaded the original. Cross-checked the employee list. Each of us had filed for extended or enhanced coverage within the last year. 2 had cancer. 1 had MS. I sat back and let the weight of it settle. This wasn't a coincidence. It was company policy. Sanitized. Executed. Documented. I called Jordan. Told him what I'd found. Sent the file over. He didn't speak for a long time. Mark, he said finally. This is gold. This is leverage, I corrected. He was right. It was the kind of proof that didn't just win lawsuits, it won public opinion. But I wasn't sure court was the first move. Not yet. What I needed was pressure, visibility, a spotlight. Because once the truth is public, companies like mine can't hide behind silence anymore. Her name was Elena Chu, investigative journalist out of Cincinnati. She'd done a feature last year on hospital networks quietly dropping patients mid-treatment. Jordan had sent me the link. Said if anyone would care about my story, it'd be her. I reached out through her encrypted tips line. Kept it anonymous. Used a burner email. Subject line. Healthcare terminations. Documented pattern. Attached the memo. A brief summary. No names at first. Just dates. Language. Implications. She responded the next day. This is real? She wrote. This isn't a dramatization? I sent her more. A PDF of Paul's termination letter. A copy of the benefits timeline. Email threads from HR, brushing off questions about plan transitions. She asked to speak. I agreed, as long as she didn't use my name. Not yet, I told her. If this story gets buried, I want to stay buried with it. But if it really lands, I'll go public. She understood. We talked for an hour. She was sharp, asked the right questions. Never pushed. Just connected the dots I'd been staring at for weeks. This isn't isolated, she said. I've seen this before. But no one ever has the paperwork. I kept everything. I replied. Because I knew they wouldn't. 1 week later, the article dropped. Front page of her outlet's digital edition. Headline in bold. Company terminates employees days before critical medical coverage. A pattern of neglect? She didn't name the company outright, called it a Midwest-based logistics firm, but she included enough for insiders to recognize it immediately. The story laid out the memo, the termination dates, the policy change, the names, redacted but clearly real. The comment requests sent to corporate HQ ignored. It exploded. Within 24 hours, the piece was trending. Industry forums picked it up. A few local outlets ran segments. I even saw the headline on LinkedIn, reposted by people I hadn't spoken to since the early 2000s. And just like that, silence was no longer an option. The story was out. The leverage wasn't just mine anymore. Now it belonged to everyone who read it, and everyone who suddenly started wondering if they'd be next. The first signs came in the form of silence. Then panic. 3 days after Elena's article dropped, the company's press page went down for scheduled maintenance. Their social accounts stopped posting. HR emails that used to arrive like clockwork fell off the map. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen table, with a second-hand laptop and a cup of black coffee. Then the real signs hit, an emergency shareholders meeting scheduled without warning. A leaked memo about reputational risk management. Jordan forwarded me screenshots from a legal listserv someone had started an internal audit. They'd brought in an outside firm. That was when I knew it had landed. I expected a letter, maybe an email. What I got was a phone call. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Mark, it's Doug." The voice was tense, tight, but not remorseful. "I think we should talk." I didn't respond. Just waited. "Things have, escalated. There's a lot of noise right now, and I wanted to connect directly before lawyers get too involved." "Before, not instead of." "Connect about what?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "There may be a path forward. For everyone." I pictured his office, the one I helped him organize, back in 2014. The window with the view of the loading docks. "I don't think you're calling for everyone, Doug. I think you're calling for yourself." He didn't deny it. "I'd like to discuss resolution options," he said, "to avoid unnecessary damage." There it was, not regret, not ownership, just cleanup. I ended the call with 5 words. Put it in an email. 10 minutes later, one arrived. Subject: confidential discussion proposal. HR was looped in now. Legal, too. They weren't asking questions about my health or what they'd done. They were asking how much it would take to make it all go away. They still thought this was a negotiation. They still didn't understand who they were dealing with. The severance package was generous on paper. 6 months' salary. A glowing letter of recommendation. 30 days of temporary COBRA coverage as a goodwill gesture. A confidentiality clause so dense it made my teeth hurt. I read it twice, then sent it to Jordan. He called me before I'd even closed the file. "They're scared," he said. "Really scared. This offer wasn't written by HR. It came from their legal team. Should I take it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't hesitate. "Not unless you want to be part of the cover-up." That settled it. I drafted a reply. Short, direct, no emotion. "Thank you for the offer. I decline. This isn't about money. It's about accountability." I signed it, attached a formal notice of legal representation, and CC'd Jordan's office. Less than 10 minutes later, Doug called again. I let it ring. They thought they could buy silence. They'd made that assumption about the others. Paul, Claire, Ron, people too tired or sick to fight. They assumed I'd be the same. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't come this far to settle. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for precedent. For a case that other employees could point to when they found themselves on the wrong side of a policy. That night, Jordan and I filed the paperwork. Wrongful termination. Discrimination based on medical status. Intentional interference with healthcare coverage. We had documentation, testimony, the memo, and now, a national headline. It was no longer just about what they did to me. It was about what they were still trying to do-silence the people they'd already failed. I wasn't afraid of their lawyers. I'd spent 27 years fighting chaos with checklists. Now I had a different kind of system. One they couldn't control. One that didn't end with a payout and a quiet fade into retirement. I didn't want their money. I wanted the truth on the record. Forever. The emails came out during discovery. I hadn't seen them before. Internal threads buried behind administrative permissions, sent between directors, department heads, and outside consultants. Jordan forwarded them one at a time, each one more damning than the last. One subject line read, Q2 Transition Risk Summary. Another, Plan Claimants. Action Required. In the body of one message, a benefits advisor wrote, removing these employees ahead of implementation will reduce potential oncology claims by 78%. My name was in the attachment, alongside 3 others. They hadn't just made a spreadsheet. They'd turned us into risk percentages. I was a line item between Claimant B, breast cancer, and Claimant D, MS, moderate. One director responded, let's expedite. Don't want to carry dead weight into Q3. That was the moment I stopped reading. I'd seen enough. When the emails were presented in pre-trial conference, the judge didn't look at the documents first. She looked at the corporate attorneys, then at us, then back at the stack of printed exhibits. This, she said slowly, flipping through the pages, is not negligence. This is deliberate, egregious, calculated. The room went quiet. You could feel the air shift. A few days later, the company's lead counsel requested mediation, not negotiation resolution. The settlement offer was clear. 7 figures. Retroactive reinstatement of my full healthcare benefits. And most importantly, a formal admission of procedural failure regarding my termination. No NDA. No silence clause. Jordan looked at me. You don't have to accept this, he said. We can take it to trial and burn the whole thing down. I shook my head. We've already exposed them. What I wanted is on the record. This makes sure I get the treatment I earned. I signed the agreement that afternoon. Not out of surrender but completion. My name would never disappear into a spreadsheet again. Not without a fight. And not without a footprint left behind. My treatment started 2 weeks later. The reinstated coverage kicked in without delay. No copays, no red tape. Just a green light and a team of doctors who now saw me as a priority case. I underwent surgery in July. Not an easy one. There were risks, complications. I signed consent forms with shaking hands and a quiet nod from Linda, who hadn't left my side since the day I brought home the first HR email. The recovery was slow. There were days when I couldn't get out of bed. Nights where the pain made sleep impossible. But little by little, my strength returned. I started walking again, eating real meals, holding conversations without drifting off mid-sentence. Linda filled the house with soft, noise-old records, soup simmering, the sound of someone humming in the next room. I'd forgotten how much peace lived in ordinary things. The first night I slept through without waking, it caught me off guard. I opened my eyes to sunlight instead of pain. I sat up, looked around, and realized, for the first time, in nearly a year I didn't feel fear the moment my feet hit the floor. The cancer wasn't gone completely. There were follow-ups, scans, maintenance protocols, but the worst was over, and I was still here. I'd spent months bracing for a war that came from inside my own body, only to find the real enemy was the system built to support me, and I'd beaten it, not by rage, not by vengeance, but by refusing to disappear, by holding the line until the truth came to the surface. And now, with Linda pouring coffee in the kitchen and a quiet breeze coming in through the window, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Rest. Not just sleep. Rest. The kind you earn. The kind no one can take away from you. A few weeks after my final treatment, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Reinstatement Opportunity. Senior Advisor Role. It was from Doug's replacement. HR had apparently turned over most of its leadership. The message was polite, careful, and full of language about rebuilding trust and valuing institutional knowledge. They wanted me back not as a manager this time, but as a strategic legacy advisor. It was the kind of position people dreamed about. High pay, no stress, full benefits, no nights, no weekends. I read it once, closed the tab, and never opened it again. Not because I was bitter, but because I finally understood that survival wasn't the reward. Living on your own terms was. Instead, I took the money from the settlement and started something new. Small, at first. A few connections through Jordan, a retired HR specialist, a woman who used to work compliance for a healthcare giant until she was forced out 6 weeks before her hysterectomy. We called it Anchor Rights, a nonprofit, dedicated to holding corporations accountable when they target vulnerable employees under the guise of restructuring. We didn't go after headlines. We went after policies. Patterns. Fine print. We showed people what questions to ask, what documents to save, what silence really cost. The calls started slowly, 1 or 2 a month, then a dozen, then more. A man in Houston, a woman in Boise, a father in North Carolina whose son was laid off while recovering from brain surgery. They thought they were alone, just like I did. We made sure they weren't. I gave a few interviews, spoke at conferences, even did a podcast once, though I hated the sound of my own voice in headphones. People started to recognize the name, not Mark Reynolds. But the idea behind it, that if you shine a light long enough, the roaches stop scurrying, or at least, they stop pretending they're clean. I never set foot in the Twin Pines building again. Didn't need to. The legacy I left wasn't in the logistics department. It was in every worker who opened their benefits packet and realized they deserved more than a pink slip disguised as a spreadsheet. Some nights, I still sit on the porch, coffee in one hand, Linda's fingers in the other, and I think about everything we survived, everything we changed. They tried to erase me the day before I needed them most. But I didn't disappear. I made sure they'll never forget what they did. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.